Thank you, Martha. Good evening. I'm Trace Gallagher. It is 11 p.m. on the East Coast, 8 o'clock here in Los Angeles, and welcome to our special Super Tuesday election coverage, the biggest night yet in the race for the White House. Polls closing right this minute in California and Utah, but as it stands, as you saw, Donald Trump having a very good night, already sweeping a majority of the states in place. So far, it looks like about 11. We will get to that as the night goes on. And after tonight, winning a windfall of delegates, the former president is expected to be a stone's throw away from clinching the GOP nomination. Meantime, from the Nikki Haley campaign, we are hearing crickets. We're now being told that she will not be making any public remarks tonight. And of course, if that changes, we will bring you that. The president also not speaking, but we will be speaking for the next 2 hours. We have Team Fox coverage. Aisha Husni is live at the Trump campaign headquarters in West Palm Beach, Florida. Bill Malugin live in Charleston, South Carolina, with how Nikki Haley is handling the results. Rich Edson live in Laredo, Texas, with how the border crisis is impacting the ballot box there. And the White House correspondent Peter Doocy live at the White House with what tonight's primary results could mean for a rematch between Trump and Biden. But first, let's bring in the hosts of the previous show, Brett Baer and Martha McCallum, tracking all your Super Tuesday election results. Brett and Martha, thank you so much for kind of sticking with us for a few minutes here. Martha, to you first. I saw you talking to the panel all night long. I'm curious, what was your big takeaway of the night? What did you find surprising as the night went on?
Well, Trace, I think if you rewound a few years, a lot of people would not have expected that we would be where we are tonight. And it is an incredible political comeback story for anybody who covers politics or watches all of this. I think we are witnessing something extraordinary. I also think that when you look at the mix of voters and how it's shifting in the country, you look at the increase in Hispanic and black votes that it appears we're seeing in some of these categories. We're watching something that is very dynamic in this country. And you're also watching a reaction to 3 years. And we'll see how it goes. But it looks like people are getting the matchup that, some people said they didn't want. But the gravity is clearly behind these two candidates right now.
Yeah, they are. And you look at what President Trump did tonight, Brett, and you kind of think, I was just listening to Trey Gowdy earlier talking about, maybe the possibility of a Reagan mandate. If this thing goes the way that he was talking about. Was that a surprising comment? Because Martha's right. We see some of these polls, the Hispanic voters, the black voters, the things that the Biden administration is doing right and the wrong numbers are always much higher. What do you think about that kind of analysis, Brett?
Yeah, listen, we're going to see how these months go. We are 8 months from the day for the general election. That is a long time. It's the longest general election we will ever have seen in our lifetime up till now. I will say this, to Martha's point, it is a remarkable political comeback. Think of how many things have been thrown at former President Trump. Think about how many legal cases he still has yet to fight. He's, how many charges he's facing. And in the wake of that, he is getting overwhelming response from voters. Not just, a different coalition of voters. You were talking about, in some cases, Reagan Democrats. These are union workers who have decided they want to vote for Donald Trump in some of these primaries. He has defeated all of his challengers, and if you look back 2 years, we would not have predicted this day. You would have said, this is going to be Governor Ron DeSantis. This is going to be somebody else besides former President Trump.
Speaking of that somebody else, Martha, you have Nikki Haley on your show quite a bit. You kind of know what she's been going through and thinking. What do you think after tonight? She has clearly not going to speak tonight. She has no plans or events through tomorrow. Do you think Nikki Haley is done, or does she keep going?
You know what? There's no doubt that they're in an evaluation phase at this moment. I mean, the numbers are what they are. She always said that she wanted to allow many states to weigh in before she would get out of this race or consider getting out of this race. I think after tonight, those become very concrete issues to deal with. She's lost some of her financial backing in recent weeks as well, and she needs to evaluate where she wants to be as a candidate, what she wants her political future to look like. But I think enough people on the panel tonight gave her a lot of credit. No woman has ever gotten farther in the Republican presidential process than she has. And she watched a lot of the fellows, as she likes to say, fall by the wayside. I think she deserves a lot of credit for fighting a good fight here.
Yeah, and lastly to you, Brett, the former president's speech tonight, some called it conciliatory, some called it subdued. What would you call it?
It was a soft touch by the former president. He was, it was not the traditional firebrand kind of going after a number of different targets. He was giving his assessment of where his administration was and how bad he thinks the situation is now. I think there was probably, a possibility to have a dismount that maybe was on a teleprompter. That we talked about that with the panel, where there was this soundbite. But maybe that was his pitch. He does things a lot off the cuff. And this was an off-the-cuff speech, probably from the heart, to his supporters in Mar-a-Lago. I will say this. Nikki Haley, no matter what happens after today, will have some people on the convention floor in Milwaukee from Vermont and from the District of Columbia who will nominate her for the presidency of the United States. And we'll see what happens to her campaign after this.
Yeah, Brett, Martha, and your panel, exceptional work as always. Thank you for coming on the show. We very much appreciate it.
Oh, good to be with you, Trace.
Well, continuing coverage now, Super Tuesday with tonight's results. A rematch of the 2020 presidential election between Biden and Trump looks even more likely. The White House correspondent Peter Doocy is live at the White House with more on this. Peter, good evening.
Good evening, Trace. And all has been quiet here in person at the White House. But about 45 minutes ago, we got the first reaction to tonight's results from President Biden himself. And when you look at the 5 paragraphs of the text that they sent over, there's some stuff about what Biden would do with a second term, but it's a lot more about Donald Trump. And we pulled out the key paragraph of the president's statement. It says, if Donald Trump returns to the White House, all of this progress is at risk. He is driven by grievance and grift, focused on his own revenge and retribution, not the American people. He is determined to destroy our democracy, rip away fundamental freedoms like the ability for women to make their own health care decisions, and pass another round of billions of dollars in tax cuts for the wealthy, and he'll do anything to put himself in power. And even though Donald Trump is President Biden's focus right there, at some point tonight in the war room in Wilmington, Delaware, where the re-election is based, a name crossed people's computer screens there, the campaign staff, that they were not expecting. That name, Jason Palmer. He defeated President Biden in American Samoa from out of nowhere. I checked in with the campaign. They don't seem too worried about it because American Samoa also went uncommitted in 2016 over Bernie and Clinton. And then in 2020, we saw Michael Bloomberg win it. So that was the main surprise. When I checked in with campaign staff, they also sent over a list of things that they are looking at tonight. And again, it focuses a lot less on the primary process and a lot more on what they think are openings for them in this general election fight with Trump, particularly his weakness with Haley voters, according to exit polls that were taken across the country today. Trace?
Gives us very unique insight into the strategy going ahead for the president and his campaign. Peter Doocy live for us at the White House. Peter, thank you for staying up. We appreciate it. And now it is off to Florida and inside the Trump campaign with their reaction to tonight's results. Aisha Husney is live for us in West Palm Beach. Aisha, good evening.
Trace, good evening to you. Well, you heard it there directly from the former president. He absolutely claiming victory tonight. But in that 20-minute speech, the most glaring part of it all was that he never mentioned Nikki Haley's name once, not once. And he did that as he, of course, took victory tonight, even as there are still some states that are yet to be tallied. Watch this.
They call it Super Tuesday for a reason. This is a big one. This was an amazing night, an amazing day. It's been an incredible period of time in our country's history. It's been sad in so many ways, but I think it's going to be inspiring because we're going to do something that, frankly, nobody's been able to do for a long time.
So there's been a lot of talk about unity, Trace. Haley has been accusing Trump of dividing and alienating voters, especially her voters, non-MAGA voters. Here's Trump addressing how he plans on uniting Americans.
I've been saying lately, success will bring unity to our country, and it happened before. We had the best economy our country's ever had. They wanted to get together, African American, Asian American, Hispanic American, women, men, people with diplomas from the best schools in the world, and people that didn't graduate from high school. Every single group was doing better than ever before, and it was a beautiful thing.
He did talk plenty about President Trump, calling him the worst president in our nation's history. Also talked a lot at length about the border. Clear signs, clear indications that he is wanting to now pivot to the general election. And we'll see more of that as he heads to Georgia this Saturday. You'll see dueling remarks from both the former president and President Biden. Both of them will be in Georgia at the same time. Trace?
Aisha Husney live for us in Florida. Aisha, we'll get back to you as the news warrants. Thank you. We have some breaking news coming in to Fox News at night. We can now project that both former President Trump and President Biden will win the state of California tonight, and that kind of includes that whole clean sweep. We are still checking into the numbers of uncommitted voters in California and the other states. We know there are 3 or 4 states for President Biden that uncommitted came into double digits. We will talk with the panel about that coming up as well. Meantime, will Super Tuesday be the end of Nikki Haley's campaign? Bill Melugin is live in Charleston, South Carolina tonight with that. Bill, good evening.
Trace, good evening to you. I wish we could offer you some more insight, but we have not heard from Nikki Haley's campaign in about 4 hours now. It has been total radio silence. We know that she is here in the Charleston area watching these returns privately with her campaign staff. And as of hours ago, we were told they were all in a good mood waiting for those returns. We have not gotten an update from them yet as to how they are feeling now. What we do know is Nikki Haley just won her first state of this primary, Vermont. You can take a look at this graphic on the screen right here. Vermont, the very first state of the primary, she won in. She campaigned there on Sunday. She was in Burlington. This is her second win of the primary. She previously won the District of Columbia, but this was one of the states she was expected to do well in on this all-important Super Tuesday. But she's been crisscrossing the country in recent days trying to perform well tonight. Take a look at this graphic. These are just some of the states she was in over the last week or so, and you'll notice some of the states on there: Virginia, Minnesota, Maine, some of these Super Tuesday states. Several of them have already been called for Donald Trump, so the night has not been going the way the Nikki Haley campaign was hoping as they were coming into the night. And again, we have not heard anything from them. We reached out to them to see if they have any reaction to the win in Vermont. We have not heard back from them just yet. Back out here live, these initial returns that have been coming in are very likely going to raise more questions as to what Nikki Haley's path forward is following this Super Tuesday. And as you just heard Aisha mention, during Donald Trump's speech tonight, he did not mention Nikki Haley or bring up her name a single time in about 20 minutes of speaking. We'll send it back to you, Trace.
He appears very confident. Bill Melugin live for us in South Carolina. Bill, thank you. As the second biggest delegate prize in this Super Tuesday, the stakes are especially high in Texas, given the state of the southern border crisis. The senior national correspondent Rich Edson is live for us in Laredo, Texas, with more on that. Rich, good evening.
Hey, good evening, Trace. Well, a record number of migrants have crossed the southern U.S. border during this administration. And if you look at some of the recent polling ongoing right now, in several recent polls, immigration, border issues have risen to among the top concerns among American voters. It's something both presidential frontrunners have been mentioning, have been sparring directly with one another over just the past week. They've both offered very detailed, very different strategies for addressing the border surge. President Biden and former President Trump even visited the border last week in Texas on the same day, though a few hundred miles apart. Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar represents the border district here in Laredo. He's been pushing the president to take a more aggressive approach on border security and told us the White House is starting to get the message.
Have they got off what I call their comfort zone? Yes. Would they anger some of the immigration advocates? Absolutely, they would under the Senate bill, and probably some members of Congress and senators. But again, you got to do what's right, and that is secure the border.
Former President Trump opposed that bipartisan Senate border bill. Congressional Republicans followed suit and it failed to pass. Trump's Republican challenger, Nikki Haley, says opposing that compromise, the former president is creating chaos at the border just to help his election chances. Other Republicans argue President Biden has all the authority he needs to address the southern border.
America's had enough. They've had enough of Joe Biden. They've had enough of this open border. They've had enough of this crisis. And they are looking for someone to lead them to some solutions.
Texas also has Senate primaries tonight. About 10 Democrats campaigning for the nomination to take on incumbent Republican Senator Ted Cruz. AP says Democratic Congressman Colin Allred has secured the votes to take on Cruz. He needed 50% plus one vote to avoid a May runoff. But before the polls close this evening, a pro-Cruz super PAC was already releasing ads attacking Allred. Back to you, Trace.
Rich Edson live for us in Texas. Rich, thank you. Let's bring in tonight's panel. Maslansky and Partners President Lee Carter, Fox News contributor Steve Hilton, and criminal defense attorney and federal litigator Vic Bajaj. Thank you all for coming on. I want to pick up, if I can, with you, Vic, where Rich Edson left off there, because the Fox News polling, it says, best describes the situation on the U.S. southern border. The numbers do not weigh heavily in the president's favor here. You have almost 8 out of 10 voters saying what's happening down at the border is an emergency. 78% say it is an emergency. I mean, if you're in the Biden administration, those are alarm bells. Vic.
And those are just numbers, Trace. When we actually talk about what those numbers mean, it's startling, it's frightening, and you can't blame people for being absolutely terrified for their family's liberty and limbs. Let's talk about this. 10 people per year, on average, of people on the national, international terrorist watch list were coming in per year from 2020 to 2022. Well, just since October, we have 59, and just one a couple of weeks before President Trump made his way down to Eagle Pass. It's not only dangerous, it's dangerous and desperate, because now the plugs are being put in the holes in the dam. And what happens in the world of organized crime is when the opportunity is getting narrow and narrow, the danger increases exponentially.
Yeah, now moving on to tonight, Steve Hilton, Nikki Haley. I mean, we talked a lot about this, talked about it with Martha. Does she stay in? Does she get out? I mean, it doesn't look good for her.
I do love Martha's phrase that Nikki Haley is in an evaluation phase. I'm not sure how long that phase needs to be. There's not a lot to evaluate. I mean, this is a disaster for someone who's actually seriously trying to win elections. She's winning nothing, practically. And the mystery about all this is what it's all been about. The last few weeks of this campaign. And I think it is worth analyzing this situation, because I talk to friends, Republicans. I'm around the state a lot. I would be down in San Diego. There's a great watch party tonight, Team Freedom, the epicenter there. I talk to my friends in California and across the country. They don't understand. And even if you take Nikki Haley's arguments at face value, why she was in this race the last few weeks, they said at the beginning, well, if we just let one candidate go 1-to-1 with Donald Trump, then it'll be a real contest. Well, how did that turn out? She was 1-to-1 pretty much from the beginning. It's been a complete flop. Then they say, well, actually, the voters, the Republican voters, they deserve a choice for their presidential candidate. It's not a real choice if you're not winning any actual contest. This isn't an opinion poll to express a view. This is about choosing a candidate for president. What's this about? She's saying, well, maybe she'll have, because she's got these delegates, some leverage at the convention. Leverage for what? Her entire campaign was about identity politics, that her age, that she beat the fellas, as she endlessly and gratingly went on about. And the final point I think it's important to understand, when people say, well, really, this is the phrase you hear a lot, is that she's now the I told you so candidate. She says that Trump can't beat Biden, and so she's going to be proved right, and in the end, the party will come back to her. She completely misunderstands that this is not about one person. The Trump movement is about ideas and not just one individual. The idea that the party will come back to her after all this, to me, is ridiculous.
Let me get to Lee Carter now. Steve, Axios says that the following here, Lee Carter: Biden's new strategy, go for Trump's jugular. Quoting, Biden has told friends he thinks Trump is wobbly, both intellectually and emotionally, and will explode if Biden mercilessly gigs and goads him. Go haywire in public, as one advisor put it, instead of focusing on jobs, the economy, areas in which polls suggest Americans aren't giving Biden much credit. Biden would be making the contest as much about Trump as his own accomplishments. What about that strategy, Lee?
I think it's a big mistake. We've seen a lot of people try to go after Donald Trump, and it usually backfires. You can't out-Trump Trump. You can't really use a different strategy to go after him. And I think that Joe Biden's whole persona is not that. I think it would be antithetical to who he said he is, and it's going to seem hypocritical. He promised to be the candidate of unity. He's going, and he hasn't delivered on that. If he does this kind of a strategy, I think it's just going to backfire. And I always say that the candidate who's reacting is the one that's losing. Yeah. If he spends all of his time reacting.
We just lost Lee Carter there. We'll try to get her back.
It's going to lift up Donald Trump, and it's going to seem like Joe Biden is losing.
Yeah, we just got her back. Lee, thank you very much. I want to put this up on the thing. We've got about 30 seconds, and I just want to put it up just for the edification of our audience. This is rating the Biden administration on, and it goes all the way through climate change, all the way down through border security. And you can see the numbers mostly failed on the right-hand side of the screen. Just keep getting worse as you go down by the topics. And I've got 10 seconds for you, Vic, but it doesn't look good. And then Steve.
Money, safety, breadwinning, family. You lose on those, you should lose this election. It's that simple.
Yeah.
And that's why the only argument you're going to hear from the Democrats and Biden, the same ones they tried before, abortion, Trump's a threat to democracy. On the actual issues, as Vic says, that matter to people, they've got nothing to say.
Nothing to say. Panel, stand by. We'll come back to you. Coming up, continuing special election coverage of Super Tuesday, the night filled with success for the Trump campaign. But what does it mean for his legal troubles going forward? We'll have continuing coverage on that and more next on Fox News at 9. Very quick update on breaking news. We can tell you that in California, both the former president, Donald Trump, and the current president, Joe Biden, won the primaries there. Bunch of delegates going to each of those. We'll get you specific details as the show goes on. Now to the impact of tonight's primary results on Trump's legal troubles moving forward. Let's bring in Trump's senior advisor, Kash Patel. Kash, it's great to have you on. It was a big night. A couple of questions. First, big night for the former president. His speech seemed a little subdued. He did not mention Nikki Haley one time, which to me seems like an indication that he is moving forward.
I think you're right. Look, President Trump is looking to unify the country. There's no need to spike the football tonight. He sent a message out to the American people. Now that the Republican nomination is essentially over, he wants the message out there, it seems to me, that he's fighting for everybody, Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, what have you. And Donald Trump has delivered tonight across the country based on his agenda, from the border to the economy to Iran to Russia, China, and the never-ending wars. America has said resoundingly, we want President Trump back, and Joe Biden has failed.
Are you surprised at how well the former president did tonight? I mean, he lost Vermont, and that's really Nikki Haley now. She won D.C., and then she won Vermont. Those are her two primary victories. I'm wondering if you were surprised, because the numbers were very, very strong for the former president tonight, Kash.
Yeah, I actually took a look at those numbers up against Joe Biden, and I know he's running unopposed, but in places like North Carolina, Michigan, and Minnesota, President Trump scored more numerical votes than Joe Biden. I think that speaks volumes to the shift in America towards Donald Trump. Again, not just across Republican lines, but Democrat, independents, and all other political spectrums. So I'm not surprised at all. And I think for election purposes, this primary is over. And I agree with Donald Trump. It's all towards November and Joe Biden.
And I think you're right. It's not official yet, but for all intents and purposes, this is a rematch. It is the former president versus the current president, Donald Trump, versus Joe Biden. I want to go through the legal troubles, because as the former president goes forward with the campaign, he's also dealing with a bunch of legal troubles. One of them this month, of course, is by far, many believe, the weakest case, the one brought by the Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, the hush money case. The trial there supposed to start March 25th. Your thoughts on that, Kash?
I think my thoughts on all of the legal cases are Donald Trump has come in and exposed the deep state's flank and their weapon of choice, which is a two-tier weaponized system of justice. It's not a right-wing conspiracy talking point anymore. And whether it's in Manhattan or Georgia or the Colorado Supreme Court versus the United States Supreme Court, and whether you look at Joe Biden's classified documents case and Donald Trump's classified documents case, America is responding to Donald Trump's exposure of this two-tier system of justice. And what the Supreme Court, I think, took a step towards this week was uniform system of justice, which this country so desperately needs. Our constitutional republic is at stake. And people like Alvin Bragg, when they bring these prosecutions, they show their intent. They just want to kneecap Donald Trump off the campaign trail. They want him in a courtroom because they know, as a result of tonight, his message is winning everyday Americans. And now the two-tier system of justice is fully on trial, thanks to Donald Trump, and he's the only one that can expose it and defeat it. I think he's going to continue to use that to his great advantage.
Yeah, he already is, and it has been an advantage to him from step one. Kash Patel, great to see you. Thank you for coming on. We appreciate it.
Have a great night.
And coming up, California is home to the largest delegate prize for both parties. A live report on that next. Plus, who will fill the Senate seat of the late Dianne Feinstein? What would you say if we told you that right now Republican Steve Garvey is at the top of the polls in deep blue California? Our coverage of the Super Tuesday primaries continues next.
Why did I keep missing out on this?
Before you were preventing migraine with Qulipta? Do you remember the pain?
Well, interesting dynamics at play in tonight's primary in California, including the hotly contested race to fill the Senate. But by the way, we have some breaking news coming in because look at the numbers. We just now got the numbers compiled here. This is the California primary, and it's fascinating to be because you have the former president in California taking 73, almost 74% of the vote, and you have Nikki Haley at 22%. I mean, that's almost 8 out of 10 voters, 7.5 out of 10 voters. You can't get 7.5 out of 10 voters, as I often say, Steve Hilton, to tell you the color of an orange. They can't agree on that. It's just kind of the way it is. And in California, it seems like a lot. We're going to get back to that in a minute. Meantime, Christina Coleman live tracking the results of the Senate election here in California. Christina, good evening.
Hi, good evening, Trace. And yeah, I want to mention those big numbers that you just mentioned with the presidential primary there. You know, last year the state GOP changed its primary rules, allowing for any candidate who secures more than 50% of the vote to walk away with all of the state's 169 delegates. So that is huge. That will be a big help for Donald Trump as he works to secure the Republican nomination. Now, as for that closely watched Senate race here, 27 candidates are fighting to fill that seat. They're trying to fill the seat of the late Senator Dianne Feinstein. Now, longtime Democrat Congressman Adam Schiff is in the lead with a Republican, former LA Dodgers star Steve Garvey. Now, Garvey did not pay for a bunch of TV ads. He didn't pay for any at all, or he holds any big rallies, but he gained a lot of traction in this race. Political experts say his baseball stardom and Schiff's campaign ad blitz, which elevated Garvey's standing among Republican voters, has helped this GOP contender. Now, the top two finishers in this primary will compete against one another in November's general election, regardless of their political party. Also, a Republican has not been elected to a statewide office in this deep blue state since back in 2006. However, Garvey is still optimistic about his chances winning if he makes it to the general election. He remains confident. He spoke to reporters just moments ago after the polls closed. Take a listen.
The people are speaking. I think they're listening to my message, talking about common sense and compassion, building teams and consensus, and for some reason, this is resonating now.
Congressman Adam Schiff cast his ballot today. He, too, seems very confident as he remained in the lead ahead of the other high-profile Democrats in this race, Congresswomen Katie Porter and Barbara Lee.
I think we're on a great campaign. We're very proud of it. We have an amazing campaign team, and it's been just wonderful traveling up and down the state, meeting Californians.
Again, this has been a very close and intense and expensive race. Open U.S. Senate seats are rare here in California, and this is also the most expensive Senate race in the state's history. Together, all the campaigns, they have spent more than $65 million so far. Trace?
That's a bunch of money. Christina Coleman live for us in Los Angeles. Christina, thank you. Lee Carter, Steve Hilton, and Vic Bajaj are back with us now. I don't know, Steve Hilton. I think that I want to put this. This is a voter we talked to, and he gave us his reason why he voted for Steve Garvey and why he did not vote for Adam Schiff. Watch.
Steve Garvey. Well, he's a Trump supporter, number one, and he's
speaks a lot of sense. I mean, in Adam Schiff, there is one sick individual. He shouldn't be anywhere near the Senate. He shouldn't be the dog catcher anywhere. The man is terrible. He's a liar. Everything that comes out of his mouth is a lie.
I mean, the bottom line of the primary, Steve Hilton, is that Steve Garvey could actually come out on top. Now, that doesn't mean that in the general election he would, because it's a one-on-one race. If Garvey and Schiff are, you know, then all of a sudden you have the lone Republican. You can't split up the Democratic vote like they're doing tonight, and you got to have Garvey versus Schiff, and the odds become much longer.
That's true, but I think what we're seeing, and I'm glad that the nation is waking up to this, is that California is way more Republican than people think. Even before the last few years, if you look at the average vote share for Republicans in statewide races, it's over 40%. And now, in the last few years, have you seen this accelerating sense of real failure from the Democrats on every single issue, not just the big ones that we see all the time, crime and homelessness, but on the state of the public schools, where we have the worst literacy in the country. We have the highest taxes, but the worst poverty, on and on. Every issue, a disaster. People are waking up, they want change. And in Steve Garvey, you have a candidate with a very attractive message, a very, a manner that people really relate to, and of course someone that in big parts of the state, they know him and love him. And it's a very exciting moment.
Yeah. CBS News said the following here: California Senate race results could hold some surprises on Super Tuesday. Goes on to say, despite its nickname, the Golden State is perennially deep blue when it comes to politics. But this year, California could go partially red. Let's go to the man with the red tie, Vic Bajaj. What do you think about this, Vic? I mean, you know California. You know, you've done a lot of work here. It is blue. I mean, Steve Hilton's his optimistic view, but it is blue in California. Is the pendulum swinging?
Absolutely, beyond a shadow of a doubt. I've had court in Santa Cruz. I've had court in San Francisco, in Oakland, in Los Angeles, in San Diego, not to mention the federal courts throughout California. And I can tell you, the conversation I have with everyone on the other side, on the prosecutorial side, and on my side, the defense side, is safety, border, and money, the trifecta. It's a very simple equation, and now the pendulum is swinging. It may take a couple of 3 years, but it's undeniable at this point.
There's a reason we have three of you on the panel, because we're going to try and break this tie if we can, because Lee, I mean, the whole thing, Lee Carter, is you crunch the numbers. You know kind of the numbers. You look at California. My question to you is, I mean, Vic's right. We could oust this far-left DA in Los Angeles. It seems like there are at least bits and pieces of the state that are moving toward the right. But do you think that Steve Garvey has any chance in the fall against Adam Schiff?
I think it's a real tough road when it comes to the fall in California. But I think that we are seeing that there's a lot of people out there who are just rejecting the very notion that Democrats are putting out there, that if you disagree with them, that you are either stupid or ignorant or something else. And what's happening now is people are saying, you know what, I care about the border. I care about security. I care about homelessness. I care about all of these issues. I want my community back. And so there's a much broader appeal among Republicans than in some of these states than you expect. You see it in California. We're starting to see some of that same kind of thing happen in New York. And so I think we are seeing a surge in conservatism in places where we didn't expect it. And this is a really big deal that we're even having this conversation. We haven't seen anything like this happen since 1988. You know, he hasn't spent a lot of money. This is just part of who he is, and people saying that they want an alternative.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Lee Carter, Steve Hilton, Vic Bajaj, stand by if you would. Coming up, we have live coverage on the ground in Colorado. 1 day ago, the Supreme Court ruled that Trump could remain on the ballot in Colorado. It was 9-0. We're going to have some reaction and some results next.